Hi there, my name's Lucy Jones and I've done an English excerpt of Weltalltage by Paula Fürstenberg, which I would like to read. It's about two friends who are living together in a flat share and have known each other for a long time, and one of them is very sick. A list of possible ways to start this story. Z. You can't punch with a raised fist. This should have been the first sentence of your novel. It came to you a few weeks ago while you were vacuuming. It was one of those sentences that you say came out of nowhere. But that's not true, because all sentences come from somewhere. And what you mean is that you have no idea why you thought of it. In any case, it came easily to you, and you carried it around proudly for a few days and looked forward to the sentences that would follow. Then you sat down at your desk and added it to the manuscript of your novel. But no other sentences followed, and your happiness gave way to familiar doubts that have always come easily to you. Because if you're too stupid to tell the difference between the beginning of a novel and a saying on a teabag string, perhaps you could have kept your part-time job as a PA at a newspaper. You got up from your desk and walked across the hall to tell Max. He said, "It's just a sentence, you're being overdramatic as usual." It was one of those blunt things that only best friends can say because of countless other discussions that have gone before. You forgave Max straight away and pulled a fake insulted face. He smiled and you were relieved, because for a while you'd both been going around with unfake insulted faces. It may have been the only smile you'd managed to tease out of Max for months. So at least the sentence that didn't go anywhere was useful in that way. Then you went back to your desk, where you left the sentence in your novel, stubbornly hoping that it would deliver a result, like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Why? This is Max's story, and originally you wanted to keep your story out of it. But because you're telling the story and Max has been your best friend for 20 years, keeping out of it isn't possible. So it's also your story, and you realised this the day you were the worst friend in the world. You were sitting in the kitchen with Max, which was unusual, because Max had started keeping to himself. You'd just been talking about getting a cat, which you'd only suggested because you thought a pet would do him good. And you'd remembered that Max had always wanted a cat. You didn't particularly like cats, but you liked Max, and it was one of your more desperate attempts to get him through his difficult phase. But Max only harped on about vet bills, about not having a proper place for the litter tray, and the smell of cat food in your vegetarian fridge. The more you argued, saying how fluffy and fun a cat would be, the more morose Max became, slumping further into his chair, his gaze more downcast, until he suddenly muttered, "You're right, it's as if there's a sack of darkness inside me. Mrs. Double-Barreled Name says I need to go to hospital." You looked at him for a moment, trying to control the feelings he was bringing up in you, but you couldn't. Instead, your voice got loud and your tone sharp. "You just have to sit up straight. Look how you're sitting. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Pull yourself together, Max." These sentences felt strange, like a foreign language in your mouth, but they shot right out of the middle of your body, perhaps from your own sack of darkness, which had just been ripped open. X. This is Max's story, and because it's a story about illness, it starts with his symptoms. Max had the full range: sleeplessness, cheerlessness, hungerlessness, sluggishness, hopelessness, listlessness, restlessness, and later also speechlessness. When people talk about being sick, one of the many euphemisms and cover-ups is to talk about having an illness and its symptoms, as if it were a surprise gift. It's a way of parceling a crisis into a manageable package that seems less threatening. But the opposite is true in Max's case. He'd gained nothing, and almost everything was wrong with him. There's confusion in general about whether sick people have something or whether something's wrong with them. What do you have and what's wrong with you mean the same thing. You don't like either, but in Max's case, you lean towards what's wrong with you. His textbook symptoms were pointing clearly to what was wrong, and yet it took a whole year for anyone to work it out. You saw the changes in his body. After all, You'd had 20 years' practice of looking at Max's body. You saw the way he was shrinking into himself, the way his limbs had started folding in on themselves, knees squeezed together, elbows pressed into his body, as if he were trying to take up less space, trying to disappear, trying to maximize what was wrong with him all the way to maxlessness. You saw the sack of darkness he was carrying aside, and how it got bigger the thinner he grew. You saw all this, but you couldn't figure out a diagnosis. This is easy to explain. You've had things wrong with you too, but like Max, you know very little about the fine lines separating a regular bad mood from a sick bad mood. You'd both grown up in a world where people often talk about work, but rarely about bodies. The only contact you'd had with medicine was the mostly painful thud of a medicine ball in sports. Long ago, your body had taken a laid-back attitude to gravity, and ever since, you'd suffered regular bouts of vertigo. So you'd probably experienced more illness than most people in their early 30s. But what you knew was only an island. No sooner had your attacks started than you learned not to talk about them. There was a reason why you weren't on the ball when it came to what was wrong with Max and his diagnosis, but it wasn't an excuse. After all, you both wanted to be better than the world you've been born into. Thanks a lot. Anyway, so this is Weltalltage, a great read. It's got everything in it. It's funny, it's philosophical, it's got some really great writing in it, and it's published by Kiwi, and just came out this spring. Thanks a lot.